So continuing onward with the wrap up of the Fasig-Tipton July yearling sale, we wanted to jump in and touch on sires. We're going to kind of give an overview of what we thought of these horses and specifically talk about a couple hips that jumped out to us. One sire who really surprised me because I did not like him much at all when we inspected stallions was Spun to Run. Overall, what was surprising was his horses were very athletic. I think when I remembered inspecting him at Gainesway, he was a little bit crooked. He was an interestingly built horse, but seeing what he's doing with his offspring, most of them were very consistent in terms of athleticism. We had a couple that did make the final list. One was actually, interestingly enough, we thought she was a bit immature, was hip 21, Rosalind Pollins. What do you think of her overall?
You know, I thought she was a nice little filly. I didn't think she was the biggest. She definitely had a very athletic walk to her. Rosalind always does such a phenomenal job with her horses. You know, she vetted clean. She had a really nice way of going. I just dinged her a little bit just because her pasterns were a little bit too slack for me, you know, to really want to spend a significant amount of money on her, but definitely looked like an athlete.
So on that next, we had Hip 66, which was another filly that was by Spun to Run. What were some of the things you thought about that filly?
Oh, she was very, very flashy, very athletic. Just had a huge walk on her, huge hind end, really in a growth spurt. So she's really going to develop even more. And the fact that she was walking so well and moving so well while in such a growth spurt really stood out to me. You know, she is a March 16th foal, and so a lot of time to mature. I do think that for a physical, 200,000 by the Leblongs is a phenomenal buy. You know, and the sire is still, you know, just starting to produce. So that is a question mark, but she's a phenomenal filly.
Another one that was on the list was Hip 16. And she was actually a very nice Spun to Run filly. She looked a little bit more...
Complexity.
Complexity, sorry. Different first season sire, which we will jump into. So let's just go into Complexity. Complexity, interesting. Typically, McLean's Music tends to throw very fast-looking horses, heavy musculature up top, but lighter-boned horses. What we kind of saw overall with the Complexities was there was a little bit more bone on these horses than your typical McLean's Musics, which was nice to see. Because McLean's Music can kind of be, you know, he was a one-hit wonder, ran a huge race. He's been a successful sire. You kind of have to be picky about what types of mares you breed him to make sure you get more substance into them. So it was nice to see a son of McLean's Music who is producing horses with a little bit more substance, knowing how prolific his sire was. So let's talk about Hip 16. What'd you think of her?
I thought she was a really nice filly, had a good walk on her. Knees were a little bit offset, but really nothing that was too off-putting. Really nice shoulder on her. I think she'll do really well with Eddie Woods.
So what next sire? I'm going to fumble over my words a little bit here, but I get them confused sometimes. I'm like, World of whatever. Global Campaign. Global Campaign is another new first season sire. He had actually a couple interesting horses that did make our list, specifically one that was at Colin Brennan's Straight Line Sales, Hip 2.
Give me a second.
Sorry, we're a lot of hips, a lot of horses going around to try and keep on track.
We actually had two colts there.
Yes.
So I don't know which one you wanted. The 135 and the 220.
220 was the horse. So this was actually a very interesting, bigger two-turn. He was a darker horse with a couple white stockings on him. Very flashy, very pretty horse. I liked him a lot as kind of more of a two-turn dirt colt. But Colin Brennan, as Dominique pointed out, had another one who was hip 135. Let's talk about 220 first. What did you think of him?
Well, I always say, you know, horses are like cars. Everybody has a slightly different taste. He wasn't for me personally. Obviously, we left him on the list. But to me, he was very, very big. A little bit too heavy for my personal taste, but he had a nice hip, good shoulder. I think he just needs a little bit of time. My biggest concern was I just couldn't tell if he's going to be a big, strong, you know, dirt horse or if he's just going to be a little on the slower side.
So as you can see, a little bit difference in opinion. There are horses at the sales where Dominique and I are completely opposed on each other's viewpoints. Usually when we are perfectly
I'm
aligned,
always right. I'm always right.
when we're aligned, that's when we know we're on the right horse. So Global Campaign was interesting. He's a son of Curlin. It'll be interesting to see how these horses play out, if they become later maturing, kind of like Curlin sons tend to be. Another horse which was interesting because he was so hot in the weanling market, but his horses seemed a little bit hit or miss at this sale, was Vekoma. He had some very pretty horses, but kind of last year, and it happened very similarly with Matoli. We didn't really like the Matolis at the yearling sales much at all. There were a couple at Keeneland September that I think we had that made our list, but then those horses grew and developed into what they needed to be and kind of showed out a little bit more at the 2-year-old sales. So it's interesting if Vekoma is like that as well. He's a candy ride out of a Speightstown mare. There were some pretty horses. There were some flashy horses. There were some horses that really looked like they need to kind of come into themselves, need a little bit more time. So what were you thinking with some of the Vekomas that you saw?
I liked a couple of them. I really liked Hip 34 at Vinery. He was purchased by the Demericks. I thought he was very, very fluid, had a great push. I also liked the 129 at Indian Creek. Overall, I did think they had a very typical candy ride hind leg that I do think a lot of the other ones needed to grow into a bit more. So I think they might just need a little time. And, this sale is so early in the year. These babies are going to change so much, by the time they're racehorses. But I thought the Vekomas had phenomenal shoulders, phenomenal hips. I just think a couple of them needed to grow into that back leg a little bit more.
So what Dominique described as the candy ride hind leg, a lot of people, there's differences of opinion on it. If you look at Sons of Candy Ride and you look at the foals that he produces and some of the foals that Sons of Candy Ride produces, some people talk about a candy ride hawk. And if you actually look at it a little bit more, the length of the bone from the horse's stifle to the point of his hock in Sons of Candy Ride tends to be a little bit longer than in other stallions. And that's something that's consistently reproduced in that candy ride line. And some of those horses need to grow up a little bit for that hock to come under them a little bit more behind and be a bit more effective. So that's what we're talking about when she says the candy ride hawk. Going on to another sire, which actually surprised me, which is, again, another son of Candy Ride, is Gift Box. Gift Box had actually, or he's twirling candy.
I believe he's twirling candy.
So in that same line, these horses tended to be a little bit tidier, a little bit tighter at this sale in terms of balance. We had several on the list. I think one of them was hip 43 and another one was hip...
Well, one was hip 59. Honestly, we didn't have a 43, so just stop with the numbers. We definitely had hip 59, who was at Mockmore Hall. He was a really solid little colt. I can't keep them all straight here.
Yeah, we had one more that we had earlier in the sale. So, overall, the gift boxes, I liked them. They were also another one that I thought was kind of a sleeper stallion. You've had some of these stallions that were racing primarily in California that didn't maybe get as much excitement and attention as they went to stud. Gift Box would have kind of fit that mold, but overall I thought he produced some good horses. To be honest, 100% honest, going to this sale, I was not overly excited about the group of first season sires this year, but I was pleasantly surprised on what we saw from some of these first season sires. So another one who had one filly that we absolutely loved was Instagram. Instagram had a filly that we just thought was incredible. We really liked her.
She was at Gainesway. I'll find the hip. She was at Gainesway.
So she was at Gainesway. She did make our final list, our final cut. She was in the top 4 fillies that we were considering bidding on. But we had others shuffled in the order that we wanted to go for before her. So hip 236 was who she was. She was the one Instagram at the sale that we really liked. I don't remember seeing too many others. But it'll be interesting to see how Instagram plays out. Obviously, a son of Into Mischief, it could go a couple different ways. Some of them have been a phenomenal success. Some of them have been semi-successful, and some have not been successful. So with that filly, it'll be interesting to see how these Instagrams go going forward. So I think we'll jump from first season sires into other sires who are emerging.
Well, Caracara, as a $6,500 stallion, I was pleasantly surprised, honestly, by the overall group. I really liked one of his fillies that was at Gainesway. Surprisingly enough, she sold for 150,000. So she was quite a physical. But you know, for that price range, for what he's produced that I saw at that sale, you know, he could be an emerging sire along that price point.
No, I think he actually had quite a few that we did like, and some didn't make final cuts, one did. But he was an interesting sire, again, in that 6,500 price point range where it could be something to watch. What I noticed with his offspring, they look like they want to be a little bit later. They might not be super precocious, but it does look like he might get you kind of that later maturing type horse. So it'll be interesting how that plays out. One who everybody has been excited about and talking about, and the 2-year-old sales were buzzing about him. And I think everybody hopes, you know, that he will become what he was as a racehorse, was Matoli. And you had a filly on the list that you absolutely loved.
Yeah, the Gainesway 117 Matoli filly, absolute stunner. You really can't fault her for absolutely anything. She's straight racehorse. I feel she could go to the track right away. Hartley Dorenzo picked her up. They'll do a fantastic job with her. Not sure if they're going to run her or pin hook her, but definitely if they pin hook her, I expect she'll go for quite a sum of money.
So we are missing one first season sire, and that is one that actually had one of the sales toppers. So Authentic had a phenomenal filly in the sale that sold for 475,000. She was incredible. She actually looked phenomenally like her sire. She was very similar top line and then lighter framed. What some people don't know about Authentic, if you go to Spendthrift and you look at Into Mischief is a little bit more meaty, muscular. Authentic is a little bit on the lighter side. He was a horse that we had seen in California several times. And that was the COVID year where I think that Derby being pushed back to September dramatically helped him. He was a horse that needed time to fill out, strengthen up, and become the horse that he became. And obviously, as you saw throughout the season, he won the Kentucky Derby in September, and then he won the Breeders' Cup Classic. And he was a horse that very much needed that time. She was a lot like him, though. She was on the lighter side.
She was fantastic. You couldn't really fault her for much, but yeah, she looked just like him.
So, since there's so many emerging first season sires, we'll continue on with one more who was actually the monster of a horse that year before Authentic came out, and that was Tiz the Law. Tiz the Law, what we have seen from Tiz the Law at the weanling sales was people say he throws a bull, just this tiny. You know, he doesn't put a lot of height on them, but he does put a lot of substance and muscle into these horses. There were several that came out, and I wrote in my catalog, ugly but athletic. And there were a couple others that were actually pretty. But he actually had some interesting horses that did make our final cut. It'll be interesting to see how those horses come out, because they're meaty, they're strong, I don't know if they'll necessarily be precocious, but they have enough substance that they might run it too, but they also might grow into themselves as they get a little bit older.
Yeah, they do seem to carry a little bit of more weight in their shoulder over their neck set. Obviously, the fillies will lean out. We saw a nice filly at Paramount, hip 342. She should be okay, but I guess my concern would be as a colt with that testosterone, if they do continue to thicken up versus lightening up. That would be my only question mark.
Yeah, so he looks like he does produce similar type offspring to his sire Constitution, but most of all, and this was one thing when we were considering breeding mares to him, when I spoke to Coolmore, they did say, look, he does throw a little bit of a little strong man, so make sure you breed some height to him because he'll put a lot of weight on those horses. So it was interesting to see that is consistent in the yearlings that we did see. Overall, as Dominique had pointed out in the previous sale, the market's correcting. The last couple of years post-COVID, there was a supply and demand issue in the marketplace, and a lot of prices at these yearling sales were pretty expensive and semi-ridiculous at times. It does look like the market is correcting back to being a lot more realistic. And as Dominique pointed out, it does look to be more of a buyer's market where you can get good horses in good price ranges. It'll be interesting to see. Saratoga is not the best barometer because it's a sale that people just love spending money at. But it'll be interesting to see how the New York bred sale plays out, and then going into Keeneland to see if that's still the same thing. But very much, as we saw at this auction, you could get good horses for good prices. I mean, as we said, the Unified Colt in the previous video we thought was the best colt in the sale. $92,000 for a phenomenal colt is a bargain. Same thing with the filly that we got for one of our clients. $47,000 for a practical joke filly is, again, a bargain. So looking at that, I think it's, if you're in the yearling market and you're interested in yearlings, it's definitely a year to dive in a little bit deeper, because you might be able to get your hands on some quality horses at prices that in the last 2 years you wouldn't have been able to. So thank you so much for watching. This is the wrap up of the overall Fasig-Tipton July sale. We'll keep rolling on with more videos as the Saratoga meet goes on. So thank you again.